first 14 verses. 13 verses, I'm sorry, 1 through 13. 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, the first to the 13th verse. I'll read the 14th verse too. When you have it, say amen. 1 Corinthians 10 and 1, 10th chapter. 1 Corinthians 10th chapter. Start at the first verse. 1 Corinthians 10 and 1.
Amen.
When you have it, say amen.
Amen.
Give Sister Jamie a little bit more time.
Okay, amen.
Amen. All right. It says, moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them, and it was written, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. There hath no temptation taken you but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. Wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry. May the Lord have a blessing to the reading, the hearers, and doers of his word. I have a word from the Lord today. I have a word from the Lord for us.
Amen.
For us today. And I want y'all to hear what God is saying.
Amen.
I want y'all to hear what God is saying. It's a word of encouragement, also a word of admonition. Word admonition just means warning. And he says in the 11th verse, he says, now all these things happen unto them for examples. So we can look at what happened to them and use what happened to them as an example, and they are written for our admonishment, or our admonition, meaning to warn us. It says, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So we have to look at what happened to them and say, what can we learn from what happened to them? Now, I really need y'all to hear me.
Amen.
I really need y'all to hear me. I want to talk about the season of transition.
Amen.
Season of transition. It's very important managing your season of transition. It's very, very important that we manage this season that we're in right now. Very important that we manage this season of transition. And the reason why I say that, he says we have to look at what happened to them and use it as an admonition or a warning. When you're in transition, that's a very critical point or place because many people die in transition.
Mm-hmm.
So most people die in transition. And they die in transition because they don't know how to manage the transition.
Man.
They die in transition. Another term for transition would be wilderness. The children of Israel were en route. They were leaving Egypt on their way to Canaan, which was the land of promise. And to get to the land of promise, you had to go through the wilderness. The wilderness was their transition. And we see here that in transition, actually, when you read in the New Testament, it will reveal that only 2 people that left Egypt actually made it to the land of promise.
Mm-hmm.
A whole generation of people were killed and destroyed in transition. They never made it to the land of promise. They never made it to the place that they left to go to. They died in transition. And they died in transition because they didn't manage that transition, that season, correctly. Now, I want to share some things about transition, and it's to encourage us, but it's also a warning.
Man.
Because if we don't manage this season correctly, only 3 things can happen in transition. Only 3 things can happen. You either go back to where you came from, or you die where you are, or you survive the transition, you survive the wilderness, and you make it to the land of promise.
Man.
Only 3 things can happen when you're in transition. And we have to look at the children of Israel so that we'll know what to do and what not to do if it is in our hearts to survive the wilderness.
Man.
If you want to survive this wilderness, we got to look at the children of Israel and say, how come they didn't make it?
Mm-hmm.
What did they do wrong, the reason they didn't make it, so I can make sure I don't do what they did?
Amen.
Amen?
Amen.
Now, transitional place is a place in between. It's in between. When you're in a season of transition, you in between. We talk about being in between jobs,
Mm-hmm.
in between careers, or
Mhm.
in between relationships, in between experiences, or in between spiritual levels,
Man.
or in between seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at the children of Israel, they were in between. They were not in Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
and they were not in the land of promise either.
Mm-hmm.
They were not bound. They were no longer slaves, but they were not totally free either.
Amen.
They were no longer dependent, where they depended on the Egyptians for their survival, but they were not yet independent either. They didn't know how to survive on their own either.
Mm-hmm.
They wasn't broke because they made a calf out of pure gold. So they were not broke, but they were not rich either.
Amen.
They were not all the way in, or they were not all the way out. They were in transition. And it's important that we evaluate and assess what happened in their season of transition so that we can understand better the season of transition that we're in, and we can better manage this transition so that we can get through this transition and go into the land that God has promised us.
Amen.
Now, when you talk about transition or the wilderness symbolizes scarcity. Symbolizes scarcity. It symbolizes instability. It symbolizes unproductiveness. It symbolizes lifeless.
Mm-hmm.
It symbolizes boring. It symbolizes tiredness. And the list goes on and on. You can add to that list because we all know what season we're in.
Amen.
We all know what season. You know the season you're in, and you know what's going on in your season. And we all know if we're in a season of transition, these are certain characteristics that we all can identify with. We know in a season of transition, it's a season of scarcity. We all can make money, and we all can look at assess ourselves financially, and even not just financial, but resources, and know that a lot of times you feel like you just barely making it. It's like you just barely make it. Sometimes it's from paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes you can have a little extra, but there's always something to take that extra. You're not in a place where you just have plenty, where it's just flourishing, where money's just coming in and overflowing. You're not in a place where resources are just coming in. Nobody's talking about opening up a second bank account and a savings account. Nobody's talking about a third, because you ain't got that much. It's a season where you're able to make it day by day, because the children of Israel in the wilderness, they were being fed every day. They had clothes every day. All their needs were met. You can be in transition. All your needs are met, but you don't have that extra that you want, that extra that you're looking for, because that extra that you're looking for is in the land of promise.
Amen.
Are you with me?
Yes.
And in the transition or in the wilderness, it's a season of instability, where things is not stable. It's like things are going good one day, and then the next day everything fall apart. One day you're putting the pieces back together, and then the next day it's falling back apart again. It's like everything is just unstable. It's like your time is unstable, your money is unstable, your career is unstable, your job is unstable, your relationships are unstable. Everything is just unstable. You just can't wait till the day where things just pan out and everything's stable.
Amen.
You're in that season where lifelessness, where there's just no real drive, no real excitement, no real push. It's like you're pushing yourself. You're making yourself do. You're making yourself go. You're making yourself accomplish. You're making yourself, but you don't have that real life, that real excitement, that real fervor. It's only coming through the strength of God. Amen. And when you're in this season of transition, you're not as driven as you are at other times. You're spiritually tired. You're drained. It just seems like you have to wake yourself up. You got to make yourself get out the bed. You got to make yourself clean the house. Make yourself go grocery shopping. Make yourself fill up the tank. Make yourself pay the bills. Make yourself. It's just you don't have that life that you used to, like you may be accustomed to, or the lifeless, or the life that you would like to have. Because you're in the wilderness, you're in transition. You're not all the way where you're trying to get to. Amen?
Amen.
And because of this is where many people die, right here in this transition, because they don't know how to manage scarcity. They don't know how to manage instability. They don't know how to manage that lifeless, that unproductive. When I look at our ministry today, if I didn't know how to manage the fact that, we lost a lot of members. It's not that many members. It's not that, we don't have that much offering. You have to know how to manage this season, and you have to know that this is a season.
Amen. Amen.
It's a season.
Amen.
That's all it is. It's a season. And everyone have to go through this season to get to where you're trying to go.
Amen.
You have to know it's not going to be like this
Yes.
always.
Yes.
But it feels that way. When you're in the wilderness, it seems like you've been here all your life. And the devil tell you, like, man, it just seems like I ain't never going. He just throw all those nevers in your head. Ain't gonna never get no money. Ain't gonna never have no job. Ain't gonna never have no work. Ain't gonna never have my own house. Ain't gonna never have my own business. Ain't gonna never. He just throw all these nevers in there, and he try to make your season eternal. And you have to fight off those thoughts and fight off those feelings, amen, that the devil is trying to make you feel. Because if you start embracing those thoughts and embracing those feelings, then you're going to act on those feelings. And what's going to happen, you're going to be overthrown in the wilderness.
Amen. Amen.
In the wilderness. Now, God's purpose for transition. Turn with me to Deuteronomy 8:2. Whole 1 Corinthians, we're going to come back to that. But turn to Deuteronomy, the 8th chapter, and the 2nd verse. Start at the 2nd verse. Deuteronomy. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 8. And let's start at the first verse. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Deuteronomy 8 and 2. When you have it, say amen.
Amen.
So all the commandments which I command thee this day, so we know who's talking. All the commandments which I command thee this day, who's talking? God is talking. He says, all the commandments which I command you this day shall ye observe to do, that ye may what?
Live.
God said, now, because you're in the wilderness, right now they're in the wilderness. And God said, now, I'm giving you commandments, and the things I'm telling you to do, you got to do these things in order to live. Because the wilderness will kill you. Transition will kill you. God gives us direction in the wilderness, in transition. He tells us what to do so that the transition won't kill you. He says, all of the commandments. How many of the commandments?
Oh.
See, if you don't do everything God say do in the wilderness, in transition, the wilderness is going to kill you. Transition going to kill you. This is where most people die, right here in the wilderness. Because they don't do everything God say do. Remember what Jesus told the disciples. He says, launch out into the deep and cast out what?
Many nets.
Cast out your nets for a drought. Did they do everything God say do? No. They just took one little net out there. And he says, God says, all the commandments which I command thee this day shall you observe to do, that ye may live and what?
Multiply.
And multiply. And what?
Go in.
And go in and possess the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers. He said, now I'm gonna tell you what you need to do to get out of this transition. But you got to do everything I say do. That's how critical this transition is, Jamie. When we get to this point, see what happened to get to the transitional place, you had to leave Egypt. You fought to get out of slavery. You fought to get out of bondage. You fought to get here. Now God says, now there's a different fight. Because you're not trying to fight to get out of slavery. You're not trying to fight to get out of bondage. Now you're trying to fight to get out of the wilderness. You're trying to fight to get out of this transition. Are you with me?
Amen.
And he says, I'm going to tell you what you need to do to live, to multiply, and to get out of this transition. All right? Second verse. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years where? In the wilderness. Second verse. Y'all ready? And thou shalt what?
Remember.
Remember. I need y'all to follow me. And thou shalt what?
Remember.
Remember. And thou shalt what?
Remember.
Remember. Everybody. And thou shalt what?
Remember.
Remember. God allows us sometimes to stay in this transition so long because he don't want us to get through here so quick that we don't what? Remember. There's something God wants us to remember. While you're going through this, something he wants you to remember.
Man.
That's why he keeps us here so long. It ain't supposed to be long, but he said, if you remember, you can get out of this.
Man.
But I'm keeping here because I don't want you to get out of this and then forget something. He said, and thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness. Why? First thing, the first purpose of transition, the first purpose of the wilderness is to what? To humble thee. That's the first thing. That's why God has you here. He said, before I take you to a land of plenty, I got to humble you. The purpose of transition is to humble you. What's the next thing? He says, to humble thee and to what?
Suffer thee to hunger.
To suffer thee, or in the King James, to prove thee. Anybody else has another translation?
And to test you in order.
To test you. So he says, I'm going to humble you, I'm going to test you, and then he says, to know. To humble, to prove, and to know you, whether what is in your heart. Y'all see that? He says, I want to humble you, I want to prove you or test you, and I want to know what's in your heart, whether thou wouldest do what?
Keep his commandments.
Keep his commandments or not. So 3 things. While you're in this transition, you got to know what the purpose is. Why do God have me here? It's for 3 reasons. God has 3 reasons for keeping you in this transition. 1, he's trying to humble you. The word humble actually means he's trying to tame you. He's trying to make you compliant. Because remember, you were a slave. God knows we all have this nature, this desire to do whatever we want to do. He know Pastor Mo want to do what he want to do. To be honest, Pastor Mo, you really want to do what you want. You don't want to do what I say do. You don't want to do what nobody tell you to do. You want to do what? You want to do what you want to do. And God said, I can't let you go into the land of promise with that mentality, with that attitude, with that disposition. I got to get you to the point to where you are compliant, well, you'll do what I tell you to do. I gotta tame you. So what does the wilderness do? What does transition do? It tames you. It gets all the you out of you. Are you with me?
Yes.
Then he says the second reason for this transition is to prove you or to test you. In the original Greek, it means to examine or to evaluate you. So God is now evaluating us. You're in transition right now and God is watching you. He wants to see how you're going to respond to this time, to this season, to this transition. How are you going to respond? What is he trying to see? What are you trying to respond to? He wants to see, how do you respond to scarcity? How do you respond to instability? How do you respond when things are unproductive or things are unprogressive? How do you respond when things ain't going the way you think they should go? How do you respond when you're not driven? How do you respond when you have to make yourself go, make yourself do? How do you respond? And God says, I want to observe you and see, how do you respond during these times? Because how you respond during these times tell you, not God, because God already knows, it tells you who you really are.
Amen.
This is who you are right now in transition. This is who you really are. See, it's easy for me to preach if the church was full. It's easy to do that. The church was packed. It's easy. I would want to preach then. I'd get home, getting ready. I'd go get me a new suit. Amen. Because it's going to be packed.
Amen.
But God said, let me see how you will preach in transition.
Amen.
Let me see how you're going to manage when it ain't that many people.
Amen.
How are you going to manage when it's scarce? Are you with me? How are you going to manage when it's unstable? When one Sunday you got 10 people, then one Sunday you got 4 people, then one Sunday you got 6 people, then one Sunday you got 2 people. How are you going to manage when it's unstable? How are you going to manage when you got a good offer this Sunday, the next Sunday ain't that much money? How are you going to manage? Because that's who you are.
Amen.
That's who you are. Are you with me?
Amen.
The third thing God does is, with transition, he says, I want to know what's in your heart. I want to know what's in your heart. Why are we in transition? Because God is trying to show you what's in your heart. See, in relationships, that's why when we get married, we vow to that other person in sickness and in what? Health. For richer and for poor. See, anybody can be loyal when you're doing well. But when you're sick, you can't take care of yourself. Now, how loyal you gonna be then? How loyal you gonna be when that person lose their job and they don't have any money? And God says, I'm assessing you right now because I want to see what's really in your heart. It's those down times that reveal the commitment, the love, the genuineness that's in a person's heart.
Amen.
Amen?
Amen.
So these are the 3 reasons why God allows us to go through transitions. Know this. I start out by saying you really have to, y'all got to hear what God is saying today.
Amen.
I've been taking these scriptures. When I preach, I go over these things in my mind. God, because I preach to myself. Because I'm in transition too. So I'm constantly saying to myself, okay, God, I understand you got me in this place right now and you're trying to tame me. You're trying to get some of that me out of me. That me in me that wants to do what I want to do. Because there's things I want to do. Sometimes I just want, sometimes like y'all, sometimes I just don't even want to come to church. I just want to sleep in. I'm human too. I'm the pastor, but sometimes I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I don't want to come. I don't want to be on time. I don't want to preach. I don't want to play. I don't want to sing. I don't want to clean up the church. I don't want to fix something. I don't want to do nothing. If I had my way, I just go to the club like everybody else. Amen. Just get me some Grand Marnier and sit at home and drink and watch a movie and then later on go to the club. Amen. But I can't do what I want to do. God said, I got to get that out of you. That doing what you want to do out of you. You got to learn to do what I tell you to do.
Amen.
So when we get to the point where we can obey God and do what He tells us to do, even though I don't want to do this, I'm going to do it anyway. When I look at y'all and say, why are you here? Everybody have a good reason not to be here today. But you're here anyway because you're saying, I got to do what God tells me.
Amen.
Look, I don't want to be here either. I'm tired. I can just be at home sleeping. But y'all are saying, because I got to do the will of God.
Amen. Yes.
I got to do the will of God.
Amen.
I got to do it. It ain't about me.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that God is testing us. He's watching us. He's observing us. Every Sunday, God is observing us. What do you do on Sundays? Mm-hmm. See, it's easy to say, I love God. God, I love you. I love you, Jesus. And I worship you. I adore you. And then God said, but when Sunday time comes, and that's the day I've set aside for people all over the world to come together and worship me, what are you doing on Sunday? He said, I'm evaluating you. Mm-hmm. Because in transition, it's harder. You ever been in the desert? You ever been in the wilderness? You know how hard it is to plant anything in the desert? It's hard to plant something in the desert. It's hard. It's hard to get anything to grow in the desert. We're in transition. It's hard for things to be productive right now.
Amen.
It's hard for things to be progressive. It's hard to grow a church in transition. Mm-hmm. Are you with me? Amen. We're in transition. It's hard to get people to come in transition.
Amen.
But God says, I'm watching how you manage it. Do you just stop and shut down and think, well, we're in transition, so ain't need me doing this, ain't no need me doing that. Right now we in transition. No, God said, no. That's the time I want to see, can you still do what I tell you to do, even during transitional times?
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Because if you stop during transition, that's because that's who you are.
Amen. Mm-hmm. Amen.
That's who you are. When transition time comes, that's not the time to shortchange God. Are y'all with me?
Amen.
Now, go back to 1 Corinthians 10. We're going to wrap this up. 1 Corinthians 10. I got to get this out because this is a admonition as well as an encouragement. It's an admonition. God is warning us. I understand in transition, things is not as lively as you may want it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not exciting as you may want it to be. But this is the time we just really have to hear God. God said, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Can you hear me? Because it ain't going to be, alive and all that, turned up all the time. Mm-hmm. So can you hear what I'm saying?
Amen.
Now in 1 Corinthians 10, in the first verse, y'all ready?
Mm-hmm.
Moreover, brethren, I would not have you to be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Now this is what he's saying here. He's saying, if we look at Israel back then, because what they did is for our example. What they did wrong, what they did right, we're supposed to learn something from them. He said, now let's look at them. He says, when you look back on them, all of them ate the same spiritual meat. Not meat, they ate the same spiritual meat. Mm-hmm. Okay? They all heard God's word, all of them. They heard what God was saying. And they all drank spiritual water. Okay? So God was feeding their spirits. God was giving them everything they needed to survive in the wilderness. Can y'all see that? Mm-hmm. Okay? Everything they needed, God provided. They didn't have no need that God did not provide. We all know that everything we need, we have.
Amen.
Now, I may not have a lot of extra, but I have everything I need. I got a roof over my head. I got clothes on my back, right? Mm-hmm. We have everything we need. Now, there may be some things I want that I don't get, but everything I need is being met, right? Mm-hmm. He says if we look at them the same way we are, is they're our example. He says they all went through the same thing, same experience, heard God. They even followed that rock. The rock was Christ. Christ, Christos in the Greek means the anointed one. In other words, God's presence, his power was there. They was able to see the power of God. They saw manna come down from heaven. Mm-hmm. We in the wilderness, in transition, we can still see the handiwork of God. We can still see God working miracles. We can still see God taking care of us and providing for us and protecting us. Although we may not have everything we want, but we can still see God still making a way. He's still opening doors. He's still creating opportunities. He's still providing resources. We're making it from day to day. Things are still happening. And we can see this. He said, but with them, he says, look at the fourth verse. The fifth verse. Now watch this. Y'all ready?
Mm-hmm.
But with many of them, what happened?
They're not pleasing to God.
But with many of them, God was not well pleased. God wasn't happy with them. Wait a minute. You mean to tell me they were going to church, they were singing in the choir, they was playing the keyboard, playing the drums, playing the flute and the tuba, they was playing the tambourine, they was singing, they was dancing, they was shouting, they was on the usher board, they was greeters at the front door, they was directing traffic, they even had the little cameras going, Jamie. They was doing all this stuff, and God said, but I'm still not happy with them.
Mm-hmm.
They was doing all these things, and God said, but with many of them, in transition, he says, many of them, God wasn't even happy with them.
Mm-hmm.
Can y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Well, they were overthrown.
They were overthrown in the wilderness, meaning they allowed the wilderness to get to them.
Mm-hmm.
The wilderness got to them. The scarcity got to them.
Mm-hmm.
The instability got to them. The unproductiveness got to them.
Mm-hmm.
They started to allow the things that they were experiencing, it started to get to them. They didn't know how to manage it because they started to get impatient. They started to get restless. They started, man, this seems like we ain't never. Can y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
God said they started going through the wilderness, and they was in the wilderness so long because they was in there for 40 years. And after they just got to the point they be like, man, it ain't no, we ain't never going. We ain't never. So what happens when you lose patience? Now it's affecting how you operate. Now we can understand why they start doing the things they did. Let's look at what they did, because here's our admonition.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the sixth verse. Now these things were our examples to the intent what?
We
You
should not lust.
So let's see what we shouldn't do in the wilderness. He says we should not lust after what? Evil things as they also lust. Here's the first thing. Okay? Here's the first thing. So we want to look at the 5 sins of transition.
Mm-hmm.
The 5 sins of transition. These are the 5 things that cause people to be destroyed in the wilderness or in transition. The 5 things that keep people from going into the land of promise. The 5 things that we have to be warned of. Number 1 is lust or desires. When you're in transition now, you got to really assess your desires. What is it that you want now? Because before we got here, we just came out of the season. We was talking about the will of God. Oh, I just want the will of God. I want the will of God. Lord, I want to do your will. I want to do. Then when things start getting tight, then what happened? Now